Odin has been a staple of the Final Fantasy series since the series has had summoned monsters at all. First appearing in Final Fantasy III, Odin has become one of the iconic summons of the series, typically ranking alongside Bahamut and Alexander as one of the most powerful and revered of the summoned monsters. Odin is of course named for the Norse god Odin. However, his similarities to Odin are largely superficial. The Norse Odin wields a spear called Gungnir, which the Final Fantasy Odin retains as a secondary signature attack and weapon, and the Norse Odin rides an 8-legged horse called Sleipnir, while the Final Fantasy Odin tends to ride a normal horse or a horse with only 6 legs. Otherwise, the Final Fantasy Odin bears little resemblance to the Norse Odin, who is described as a bearded figure in a cloak and wide hat, and had only one eye when he gave up the other to acquire great wisdom. Odin typically takes the appearance of a dark knight in a horned helmet, riding a horse and wielding a curved sword. The specifics of this design have varied between titles, but this basic description is almost universal. For the first half of the series, Odin tended to appear in castles and other ancient structures, but the significance of this has varied, and it's likely just a thematic element that was maintained between games for its own sake. Zantetsuken is Odin's signature attack and weapon, and roughly translates as slashing iron sword. When used, Odin appears and dashes past enemies, slicing them apart. Zantetsuken often has a unique death animation where the enemy's sprites or models bisect and slide apart before vanishing. Odin's secondary attack is Gungnir, where he throws his lance at enemies to deal high damage. Typically, Odin uses Gungnir when he detects an enemy immune to Zantetsuken's instant kill effect, but this is not always consistent. The appearance of the Gungnir varies between games, but the Zantetsuken is usually depicted as a curved sword with a notch in the lower part of the blade, and it is either made of a blue metal or has a blue aura. Another recurring but less static trait is Odin's shield. In the NES version of Final Fantasy III, Odin's shield had a swirl design on it, which was retained in Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI. After using other shields of various design, or no shield at all, in subsequent games, Final Fantasy XIV brought the shield design back, and it is also featured in Dissidia NT and World of Final Fantasy. Odin's shield has never been given a specific name until Final Fantasy XIV, where a shield in its likeness is named Skjoldur. According to legend, when Odin conquered Northern Europe, he gave Denmark to his son Skjoldur, which is why Danish kings are called Skjoldungs. Odin first appears in Final Fantasy III, faced as a boss in Saronia Catacombs. Upon being defeated, Odin is acquired as a summon under the name Catastro. Like all summons in Final Fantasy III, he will use one of 3 attacks when called, signified by his color scheme when he appears. His 3 attacks are Protective Light, which grants the party Reflect status, Slash, which damages one enemy, and Zantetsuken, which instantly kills all enemies. He could also use Zantetsuken as a boss, dealing heavy damage to the party. In Final Fantasy IV, Odin can be challenged in the basement of Baron Castle after defeating Leviathan and Asura in the Feymarch. Odin is the spirit of the King of Baron, who was killed by the Archfiend Cagnazo. It is implied the king's spirit became Odin upon his death, not that he was Odin all along. Despite this, the library in the Feymarch mentions Odin by name, implying he is a pre-existing Eidolon. The book also mentions that Odin was defeated only once before, when lightning struck his sword, and he is weak to lightning when fought. This has nothing to do with the Norse Odin and is certainly not a reference to Cagnazo, since he was the Archfiend of Water, so the meaning of this is unclear. A possible explanation for the discrepancy is that Odin was a pre-existing Eidolon that was struck down by lightning, and the King of Baron assumed Odin's identity after his death, or perhaps the original Odin was reincarnated as the King of Baron. Either way, this is only speculation. In Final Fantasy IV's sequel, The After Years, Odin returns with the other Eidolons under the control of the mysterious girl, the game's main antagonist. A brainwashed Cecil summons him against the party in Baron, but the spirit of the king recognizes his people of Baron among the party and refuses to harm them, instead turning on Cecil and striking him to free him from the girl's control. In the Game Boy Advance and PSP versions of Final Fantasy IV, the player faces Lunar Odin as the boss of Cecil's trial in the Lunar Ruins, and Lunar Odin grants Cecil his ultimate weapon, Lightbringer. Lunar Odin also appears as an optional boss in the mobile and Steam releases of the After Years, faced in the depths of the True Moon. He again drops Cecil's ultimate weapon of this game, Ragnarok. A final note here is Odin's concept art for Final Fantasy IV. The design of the Zantetsuken he has in this artwork is reused in Dissidia Duodecim Final Fantasy as the basis for Gilgamesh's Zantetsuken. In Final Fantasy V, Odin appears in a locked chamber in the basement of Castle Bal. Once the two worlds have been merged, the Jakol Cave will connect to Odin's room and allow the player to reach him and challenge him. Odin gives the player 1 minute to defeat him, and if they cannot, it is an instant game over once time is up. An interesting note is that an easy way to defeat Odin is that he is vulnerable to Petrify, so the Break Spell and Break Spellblade will defeat him instantly. What happens to Odin in the next game is probably intended as an allusion to this. In Final Fantasy VI, Odin is found in the ruins of the ancient castle. During the War of the Magi, Odin defended the castle from attack until he faced a mage immune to Zantetsuken. The mage petrified Odin and the castle was overrun. When the party finds Odin's remains, he crumbles into a magicite shard. Odin's magicite is notable for being the only magicite in the game to grant a speed bonus, making him useful for players that want to min-max their stats. In the Game Boy Advance version and later releases, the Cactar magicite grants a better speed bonus, so this importance of Odin is lost. In a hidden wing of the castle, players can find the petrified remains of the castle's queen, who was in love with Odin, and she sheds a tear that upgrades Odin into Raiden. Raiden's attack is Shin Zantetsuken, literally true steel-cutting sword. Raiden is another name for Raijin, a Japanese god of thunder and lightning. The most probable reason for the change in name from Odin to Raiden is simply that the two names are similar in Japanese. As a final note, a boss in the ancient castle, Blue Dragon, drops the Zantetsuken when defeated. This is the first time that the Zantetsuken will be available as an equipment piece the player can use. In Final Fantasy VII, Odin's summon materia is one from the boss Lost Number in Shinra Mansion in Nibelheim. Odin's attacks are mistranslated in this game. Zantetsuken is called Steel-Bladed Sword, and Gungnir is called Gungelance. Odin also appears in the game's prequel, Crisis Core, and uses Zantetsuken when his portraits line up during the Digital Mind Waves summon mode. Zack receives Odin's materia as a reward for completing Mission 816, the first mission chain in the Zack the Materia Hunter missions. In Final Fantasy VIII, Odin is encountered in the Central Ruins. When the player enters the ruins, Odin speaks to them and gives them 20 minutes to complete the dungeon's puzzles and reach his chamber, and the player has however much time is left on the timer to defeat him. Once obtained, Odin will randomly appear at the start of battle and use Zantetsuken on all enemies, but he will not appear in battles against Tonberries or Cactars. He also will not appear when facing bosses, with one famous exception. At the end of Disc 3, the player faces Cypher, and Odin will attempt to use Zantetsuken against him. However, Cypher blocks the attack with Zantetsuken reverse, bisecting Odin and destroying him. The Zantetsuken flies from Odin's hand and slices open a dimensional portal through which the wandering swordsman Gilgamesh appears and takes hold of the blade. Several turns later, Gilgamesh enters the battle and will automatically defeat Cypher. For the rest of the game, Gilgamesh will randomly appear at the start of battles in Odin's place, with Zantetsuken being one of 4 attacks you could use. If the player puts off fighting Odin until the final disc after the battle with Cypher has occurred, he will be retained through to the end of the game. In Final Fantasy IX, Odin is one of Princess Garnet's Eidolons. Queen Braun extracts Garnet's Eidolons to use them as superweapons, and calls Odin to obliterate Clara. Later in the game, Odin can be relearned by Garnet from the add-on Dark Matter. In place of the Gungnir attack, Garnet can equip the Odin Sword ability, learned from the ancient aroma found in Ibsen's castle. Odin's sword causes Zantetsuken to deal damage to enemies immune to instant death. The potency of Zantetsuken is determined by how much ore the player has in their inventory. The more ore they have, the higher likelihood of Zantetsuken killing its targets. but on the other hand, the less ore the player has, the more damage Zantetsuken will do through the Odin Sword ability. In Final Fantasy XI, Odin is one of the celestial avatars, summons associated with the constellations. Odin is the avatar of darkness. According to legend, Odin faced the avatar of light, Alexander, in an epic battle called Ragnarok 900 years ago, and is fated to face him again when Alexander returns. For this, Odin is to choose a Dark Rider to receive his power and wield it against Alexander. During the Treasures of the At-Urgans expansion, Odin chooses Prince Luzaf to be the Dark Rider and face the reviving Alexander, in exchange for aiding the prince in his desire for revenge on the Empire of At-Urgan that destroyed his home. Luzaf's change of heart and desire to be freed of his pact with Odin are a driving force of the expansion's story. After completing the expansion's main quest line, Odin can be refought to earn the right to summon him by the player. Odin does not appear in Final Fantasy XII directly, but as with many Final Fantasy summons and monsters, the game uses his name as the name of an airship. In the sequel Revenant Wings, Odin is the true form of the character Velis. Odin is a rank 3 non-elemental melee summon, and his Zantetsuken attack damages enemies and knocks them back. In Final Fantasy XIII, Odin is Lightning's Eidolon, commanding the elements of wind and lightning. In his Gestalt mode, Odin turns into a horse in reference to Sleipnir, and Lightning rides on him wielding the Zantetsuken herself. Odin's Zantetsuken is a pair of large hooked swords that connect at the hilt into a dual-bladed weapon. The blades bear Etro script that spell out Odin's name. Odin's shield also bears Etro script, which in Latin spells out Keeper of Truth, Destroyer of Corruption, Odin. The attack Zantetsuken is Lightning's finishing move in Gestalt mode, and it has a chance to kill all enemies depending on the level of the attack and the enemy's current HP. In Final Fantasy XIII-2, Lightning retains the ability to summon Odin, and does so in Valhalla to aid in the defense of the Temple of Etro against Caius. In Vile Peaks, a paradox causes Lightning's memories of when Odin first appeared to manifest as Twilight Odin, which Sarah and Noel can defeat and recruit into the Paradigm Pack. An interesting note is that Twilight Odin's dark green and purple color scheme makes him appear very similar to Lunar Odin in Final Fantasy IV. It is unknown if this is an intentional reference or coincidence. In Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII, Odin has been reincarnated as the Angel of Valhalla, a white chocobo with a brand above its eye that evokes the design of the Zantetsuken. Lightning finds it injured in the wildlands and must help nurse it back to health, at which point it will accompany and aid her in battle and allow her to ride it. Riding the chocobo is the only way Lightning can reach the Temple of Etro, where Caius now resides, and shortly after defeating him and leaving the temple, Lightning discovers the angel's true identity. Lightning can also obtain the Zantetsuken as a weapon under the name Ganrad, an alternate name for Odin in Norse mythology. In many of her appearances in other games in the series, Lightning retains the ability to wield the Zantetsuken and can use Odin's Gestalt mode attacks. In Final Fantasy XIV, Odin is a primal bound to his sword, and he possesses whomever holds it to manifest a physical form around them. Because of this, Odin's appearance changes each time players encounter him. He will be whatever race the previous adventurer to defeat him was, and he will also bear their surname. Defeating Odin rewards tokens that can be traded for replicas of Odin's sword and armor, and independently, players can acquire Sleipnir as a mount. An event added in patch 2.5 allows players to fight a stronger version of Odin, and when defeated, it is revealed that the primal is actually the Zantetsuken itself. Odin is merely the physical form it manifests around whoever is wielding it. During the event Lightning Strikes, a crossover with Final Fantasy XIII, that game's incarnation of Odin is summoned by Lightning to aid in the battle against the Aspect of Chaos, the event's final boss. Odin appears frequently in spin-off titles, but he rarely has any story significance and is just a summoned creature and a sometimes associated boss battle. Such games include Tactics, Type 0, Dimensions and Dimensions 2, the Dissidia games, the Theatrhythm games, Brave Exvius, Mobius Final Fantasy, and World of Final Fantasy. He also appears in Super Smash Bros. As a stage hazard in the Midgar stage, using Zantetsuken to cleave the stage platforms apart. One spin-off game where Odin does have a prominent role is Final Fantasy Record Keeper, where Dark Odin is the master of the Magicite records. After the player has defeated all rank 5 Magicites, they can access Dark Odin's realm and challenge him. Dark Odin embodies all 9 elements in Record Keeper's gameplay system. Whatever type of elemental attack the player uses against him first, he will shift his elemental affinities and attack patterns in response, using attacks that call back to the Magicites the player faced previously. It is unknown if there is any significance to the fact he is called Dark Odin instead of simply Odin, as the game's storyline is still ongoing. That concludes our look at Odin in the Final Fantasy series. Thank you to all the YouTubers who allowed me to use their gameplay footage to make this video, and thank you to everyone for watching. Please like and share this video, and let me know in the comments what creature from Final Fantasy you'd like to see me profile next.